The galaxy's most devastating conflict in over a millennium had just reignited, and frankly, calling it devastating was like calling a paper cut a mortal wound. The Veltharian Kickstar War had resumed after 10 centuries of ceasefire, and if you squinted really hard at the news feeds, you might mistake it for an exceptionally polite fireworks display between two overly apologetic neighbors. Now, before you start imagining fleets of dreadnoughts reducing planets to cosmic dust, let me paint you the actual picture. The Veltharians, bless their crystalline hearts, were silicon-based life forms who had evolved on a world where the most dangerous predator was essentially a very aggressive rock. Their idea of a devastating weapon was a focused light beam that could, and I'm quoting their military documentation here, cause temporary visual discomfort and mild surface heating. Your average laser pointer from a human gas station could probably conquer their homeworld. Their opponents, the Kickstar, were gaseous beings who had spent millions of years floating through nebulae, occasionally bumping into each other and calling it conflict. Their weapons of mass destruction were atmospheric disturbances that could knock over a particularly unstable house of cards. Maybe, on a windy day, the war itself followed protocols so elaborate they made human diplomatic ceremonies look spontaneous. Each battle required 48 hours advance notice, complete evacuation of all civilian populations within 3-star systems, and a formal exchange of intentions written in triplicate. Casualties were limited to a maximum of 50 individuals per engagement, with mandatory medical stations and grief counselors standing by. They even scheduled lunch breaks. Galactic news networks were treating this resumed conflict like the apocalypse had arrived wearing a tuxedo. Headlines screamed about total warfare returns to civilized space, while showing footage of what looked like two groups of teenagers having the galaxy's most courteous laser tag match. The Veltharians would fire their devastating light pulses, which created pretty rainbow displays against Kickstar gas clouds. The Kickstar would respond with catastrophic atmospheric waves that made the enemy ships wobble slightly. Truly the stuff of nightmares. Into this theater of the absurd wandered Captain Zara Hendricks and her cargo hauler, the Rusty Venture. Zara had been running freight between the outer colonies for 15 years, and her definition of a bad day involved actual explosions, not choreographed light shows. Her crew consisted of Chief Engineer Marcus Volt, a man who could fix a fusion reactor with spare parts and creative profanity, and Tactical Officer Elena Cross, whose previous job had been hunting pirates in the Kepler Badlands where please and thank you were considered fighting words. They dropped out of hyperspace directly into what their sensors registered as a massive fleet engagement. Zara's first thought was that they'd stumbled into a genuine war zone. Her second thought, after watching the sensor data for 30 seconds, was that someone was playing an elaborate prank. "Captain," Marcus called from his engineering station, squinting at his displays, "I think my sensors are broken. These readings show weapons fire, but the energy output is barely registering. My coffee maker draws more power." Elena was studying the tactical display with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle made entirely of missing pieces. "Confirmed multiple hostile contacts, but their weapons? Captain, I've seen children's toys with more destructive potential. Are we looking at some kind of training exercise?" Before Zara could respond, both fleets detected the human vessel. Within minutes, her communication array lit up like a Christmas tree. The Veltharian High Command was transmitting urgent requests for assistance from the legendary Deathworld warriors. Simultaneously, the Kickstar Collective was begging the terrifying apex predators to join their righteous cause. Zara found herself staring at two alien ambassadors on her main screen, both speaking at once about the desperate need for human intervention in their apocalyptic struggle. The Veltharian representative, a crystalline being whose body reflected light in prismatic patterns, was practically vibrating with urgency. The Kickstar ambassador, a swirling cloud of sentient gas contained in an environmental suit, was pulsing through colors that probably indicated extreme distress. "Honored humans," the Veltharian pleaded, "our conflict has reached unprecedented levels of destruction. Surely beings from a death world understand the necessity of ending such carnage?" The Kickstar ambassador's translation device crackled with emotion. "Noble warriors of the killing planet, you must witness the devastation we face. This war threatens the very fabric of civilized space. Zara looked at Marcus, who was trying very hard not to laugh. Elena was studying the battle footage with the clinical interest of someone watching paint dry. Outside the viewports, the two fleets continued their elaborate dance of ineffective weaponry, creating a light show that would have been impressive at a planetary celebration, but was somewhat lacking in the devastating warfare department. The galaxy's most feared conflict had just encountered its most dangerous species, and neither side had the slightest clue what they were asking for. The Veltharian ambassador's crystalline form flickered with what their species considered desperate urgency. Great warriors of the death world, we implore you to end this suffering with your terrifying weapons of annihilation. Surely your arsenal contains something capable of bringing peace to this devastation. Zara glanced around her modest cargo hauler, mentally cataloging their terrifying weapons of annihilation. There was a standard plasma rifle in the emergency locker, a toolkit that Marcus had been using to fix the coffee machine, and Elena's personal sidearm that she'd forgotten to register with customs 3 ports ago. Oh, and a crate of emergency flares they were supposed to deliver to a mining station. Well, Zara said carefully, we might have some basic equipment that could help with negotiations. Marcus, ever helpful, pulled out a standard-issue flashlight to check a power coupling. The beam swept across the communication screen, and both alien ambassadors recoiled in what appeared to be genuine terror. By the 7 crystals, the Veltharian whispered, the legends are true. They carry portable suns as casual tools. Elena, thinking she was being diplomatic, offered to demonstrate minimal human defensive capabilities to encourage peaceful resolution. She powered up the ship's standard plasma rifle, the kind of weapon that human security guards carried to deal with drunk miners. I'll fire a warning shot at that uninhabited asteroid cluster, just to show that continued conflict isn't necessary. The aliens began transmitting frantic evacuation orders to their fleets. Apparently, when Deathworlders offered a demonstration, entire star systems took notice. Elena lined up the shot with casual precision, the same way she'd done 1,000 times during pirate encounters. She squeezed the trigger, sending a single plasma bolt toward a small asteroid roughly the size of a city block. Standard procedure, minimal force, just enough to make a point about human capabilities. The asteroid didn't just explode, it ceased to exist in any meaningful sense, transformed into a brief, brilliant star that faded to cosmic dust in 3.7 seconds. Both alien fleets immediately broadcast simultaneous surrender signals, not to each other, to the humans. Sweet mother of engineering, Marcus muttered, checking his instruments. That was on the lowest power setting. The communication channels erupted in panic. Fleet commanders from both sides were falling over themselves to declare ceasefires, peace treaties, and unconditional surrenders to anyone who would listen. The Sixtar Collective was offering tribute in the form of rare gases. The Veltharians were volunteering to become a human protectorate. Perhaps, the Veltharian ambassador said in a voice that suggested he was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. We could discuss peace terms. Immediately, right now. Please. Zara looked at her chronometer. Sure, we've got about an hour before we need to make our next delivery. Want to grab some coffee and sort this out? The concept of resolving a millennium-long conflict over coffee apparently broke something fundamental in both alien civilizations. The Sixtar ambassador began cycling through colors that weren't in any translation database. The Veltharian representative's crystalline structure was flickering so rapidly it looked like a disco ball having a seizure. You wish to conclude peace negotiations in 1 hour? The Veltharian managed. Well, how long does it usually take? Elena asked. You talk, figure out what you're actually fighting about. Find some middle ground. Shake hands. Done. Our previous peace negotiations lasted 47 years, the Sixtar ambassador replied faintly. 47 years? Marcus looked genuinely confused. What were you negotiating? The fundamental nature of reality. It's a border dispute over mining rights, isn't it? The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either enlightenment or complete civilizational collapse. 37 minutes later, the Veltharian Sixtar War was officially concluded with a handshake, a shared mining agreement, and a mutual defense pact against any species crazy enough to carry portable suns as everyday equipment. Both civilizations established a joint embassy on Zara's ship, which she politely declined, explaining that her cargo hold was already full of emergency flares. The Galactic News Network struggled to explain how a conflict that had defined interstellar politics for over 1,000 years had been resolved by three humans who thought the whole thing was a minor scheduling inconvenience. Military analysts across civilized space began frantically recalculating threat assessments for Deathworld species, particularly after learning that humans considered Elena's demonstration barely worth mentioning and standard crowd control. Zara found herself appointed as Supreme Galactic Mediator, a position that came with the impressive salary and the minor responsibility of preventing interstellar wars. She accepted on the condition that all future conflicts be scheduled around her delivery routes, because someone still had to get those emergency flares to the mining station. As the rusty Venture jumped back into hyperspace, leaving behind two very relieved alien fleets and one very confused news crew, Marcus raised an excellent point. You know, Captain, if this is what they call devastating warfare, I'm almost afraid to see what they consider a strongly worded diplomatic protest. Zara smiled, checking their navigation for the next delivery. After all, in a galaxy where flashlights were weapons of mass destruction and coffee breaks could topple governments, someone had to keep the freight moving, even if that someone had just accidentally become the most feared peacekeeper in known space.